In the year 500, 5 powers ruled the Arabian Peninsula. An empire of the monsoon in the south, 2 Arab kingdoms serving 2 rival superpowers in the north, a kingdom of the tribes in the center, and on the eastern shore, the provinces of Persia. 130 years later, every one of them was gone. This is the story of how a world ended, and why the land itself decided who would inherit it. To understand what happened, forget the borders. Look at the land. Arabia is not one country. It is 5 different worlds, and each one made a different kind of power. In the far south, mountains rise 3,000 meters and catch the edge of the Indian Ocean monsoon. This is the one region of Arabia with rain reliable enough to farm at scale. Rain meant farms. Farms meant taxes, armies, and kings. For over 1,000 years, these highlands carried Arabia's oldest continuous tradition of kingship and monumental writing. In the north, the steppe runs up against 2 empires, Rome ruling from Constantinople, and Persia ruling from Ctesiphon. The land here grows little, but empires pay for what it breeds: horsemen and control of the tribes. The center is steppe and sand. No river runs here, and harvests come only from scattered oases. Its tribes built real political orders, confederations bound by kinship, honor, and poetry. But a kingdom needs revenue, and the center had almost nothing to tax. Kingdoms here were always sponsored from outside. The eastern coasts look outward to the sea and the India trade, and they sit in the shadow of Persia, close enough to be garrisoned. And between them all runs the Hijaz, a corridor of rock and oasis on the caravan road, too poor to tax, too costly to garrison. In 3 centuries, no empire held it for more than a moment. Begin in the south with the oldest of the 5 powers. From the highland city of Zafar, the kings of Himyar had united all of South Arabia by the 4th century. The old kingdoms of Saba and Hadramaut absorbed. Their title claimed the highlands, the coasts, and, in time, the Arabs of the interior. Their power rested on water. At Marib, on the desert's edge, a dam nearly 600 meters long turned floodwater into fields. The inscriptions record its repairs the way other kingdoms record wars. It was the machine that fed the state. The inscriptions record Himyarite armies marching deep into Central Arabia in the 5th century. But the south did not rule the center directly. It hired kings to do it. That decision created our 2nd power. The kings of Kinda ruled the tribes of Mard on Himyar's behalf. A 5th century inscription commemorates their installation. Scholars call the dynasty the Hujrids, after its founder Hujr. Their kingdom had no capital of stone. The great caravan city of their homeland, Qaryat al-Far, had already faded, and the Hujrid kings ruled from camps, moving with the tribes they commanded. It was authority on loan, and it lived exactly as long as the loan did. An older stone, carved in 328 on the Roman frontier, already shows what such kings dreamed of. An epitaph for an earlier Imru al-Qais calls him King of all the Arabs. No one ever quite was. But for 2 centuries, the empires paid men to try. Where the Euphrates meets the steppe, on the frontier of the Persian Empire, stood al-Hira, seat of the Nasrid kings, remembered as the Lakhmids. For nearly 3 centuries they were Persia's shield, policing the tribes, raiding Roman Syria, guarding the caravans. Persia paid and watched, and never let them forget who ruled. Al-Hira was also the most sophisticated Arab city of its age, home to a famous Christian community and a magnet for poets from across the peninsula. Arabic tradition remembers it as a cradle of the Arabic script. The kingdom the empire kept on a leash was quietly building the culture that would outlive them both. Rome answered with a mirror. The Jafnid kings, remembered as the Ghassanids, commanded the Arab allies of the Roman East. Their greatest, al-Harith, son of Jabala, was honored in Constantinople itself, and fought the kings of al-Hira for 40 years. 2 Arab dynasties, 2 imperial paymasters, one long duel across the steppe. The Jafnids were passionate Miaphysite Christians, sheltering a church their own emperor persecuted. Loyalty and faith were beginning to pull apart. And in the east, no Arab king at all. Persia ruled here directly. The coasts of the Gulf and Oman entered in the empire's own records as the province of Mazun. Garrisons, governors, and the sea lanes to India. Here is what Arabia looked like when an empire ruled it without intermediaries. The East was the exception that proves the design. Everywhere else, the great powers ruled Arabs through Arab kings, Rome through the Jafnids, Persia through al-Hira, and Himyar through Kinda. By the year 500, the system was complete. Every corner of the peninsula answered, directly or through a client, to a greater power. It had worked for generations. It would not survive the century. The first blow fell in the south, and it began as a war of religion. A Himyarite king's massacre of the Christians of Najran. An invasion from the Christian kingdom of Aksum across the Red Sea in 525. The king of Himyar died with his kingdom's independence. But what matters for this story is the political consequence. The oldest throne in Arabia was now a prize, not a power. Kinda fell first. When Himyar's power broke, the loan was called in. The Hujrid king al-Harith had seized al-Hira itself for a moment. In 529, the Nasrid king took it back and slaughtered him with 50 princes of his house. The kingdom of the center shattered into feuding tribes and never reformed. Tradition remembers the last prince of Kinda not as a king, but as a poet. Imru al-Qais, son of a murdered ruler, wandering the peninsula seeking vengeance he never found. His verses became the most celebrated poetry in the Arabic language. A kingdom remembered in the end through its poet. In the south, an Aksumite general named Abraha seized the throne and ruled as king of Himyar in his own right. The inscriptions record him repairing the Great Dam in 548 and receiving embassies from Rome, Persia, and the Arab kings, all at once. For a moment, Arabia's center of gravity held. These were hard decades for the whole world. From the 530s, contemporary sources describe strange years when the sun gave less light. And from 541, a great plague spreading through the empires. How deeply those blows struck Arabia, scholars still debate. In 552, Abraha's armies campaigned deep into central Arabia. Islamic tradition remembers an expedition against Mecca with a war elephant that ended in ruin. The inscriptions are silent about Mecca. What they show is reach and its limits. Then Persia ended the question. Around 570, a Himyarite prince, remembered in tradition as Saif ibn Yazan, called Persia in to expel the Aksumites. A small Sasanian force landed, drove them out, and set him on the throne as a client. Within a few years he was dead, and South Arabia was simply a Persian province. 13 centuries of native kingship ended not with a great battle, but with a garrison. And at Marib, late in the century, the dam broke for the last time. No king remained to repair it. The fields returned to sand, and the memory of that flood echoes in scripture. Rome destroyed its own sword next, and no enemy forced it. The alliance had always run on subsidy and trust, and by the 580s, both were thinning. In 582, the Jafnid king al-Mundir, victor of the Persian Wars, was arrested by imperial treachery over the old religious quarrel and exiled. His son revolted and was exiled too. Rome then deliberately broke the Arab command into a scatter of quarreling chieftaincies. The shield of Syria was gone by Roman hand. 20 years later, Persia matched the mistake exactly. In 602, the King of Kings had An-Numan III, last king of al-Hira, eliminated and abolished the kingdom that had guarded Iraq for 3 centuries. The sources disagree on the pretext. They agree on what followed. Within a few years, the tribe of Bakr defeated a Persian force at Du-Kar. Tradition would remember it as the day the desert first beat the empire in open battle. The date is debated. The direction of history is not. And then the 2 empires turned on each other in the most destructive war antiquity had ever seen. Persia took Jerusalem and Egypt. Rome struck back to the gates of Ctesiphon. By 628, the Persian king was dead at his own court's hands, and both giants were bankrupt, plague-worn, and stripped of the Arab kingdoms they themselves had dismantled. Look at the map they made. Between 525 and 628, every structure of power in and around Arabia was destroyed, decapitated, or exhausted. Remnants lingered, the system did not. And this was not the desert's doing. It was the power's own. Which brings us back to the corridor no power ever held. The Hijaz. In its oases, towns had grown in the shadow of the fallen giants. Yathrib, rich in palms, divided among feuding communities, exhausted by its own wars. And Mecca, a shrine town in a barren valley, run by the tribe of Quraysh. Scholars still debate how far Mecca's caravans reached and how rich its trade really was. What is not debated is what the town possessed that none of the 5 powers ever had. A sanctuary where feuding tribes stood equal, in a land no empire garrisoned and no king taxed. Not wealth, immunity. In 622, the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad of Quraysh, left Mecca for Yathrib. Tradition tells of persecution behind him and an invitation ahead. The feuding town had asked him to judge between its factions. Our story stops here, at the threshold, because what happened next deserves its own telling. But look at the Arabia around him. Not an Arabia of 5 powers, an Arabia where every rival structure lay broken and where 2 exhausted empires could no longer reach. Why the new faith arose and why it moved hearts is not a question maps can answer, and this story makes no claim to. What the political map explains is smaller and simpler. When a new community stepped onto the stage of history, nothing remained standing in its way. Many historians argue that this is the great political fact of the 7th century. The new order rose over an old world that had already fallen. Stand back from the map one last time. The rain built kingdoms in the south. The empires bought kings in the north, broke them, and burned each other to exhaustion. Every power that ruled by water, by subsidy, or by the sword was gone. What endured was what the kingdoms had made and could not unmake. The language, the poetry, the inscriptions, the names still written across this land. The terraces of Himyar are still farmed. The stones of Marib still stand in the desert air. Kingdoms end. The land remains. It always does.